And I want this episode of our show to be for those people, the everyday people who are finding the carnivore diet for some reason and are finding that it's very healing. It's helping them with certain issues that they've had. This world can get very confusing. And I've started to notice a trend in the last few months or whatever, where I'm getting more questions about the quote unquote carnivore cult. This is a
Mhm.
cultish kind of a diet. You have to do this certain thing. People ask questions on a lot of the Facebook groups and things that I'm part of that ask, like, is milk okay? Is it okay if I have a piece of fruit every now and again? And the answers are quite polarizing. And we're getting so many
Mhm.
people that are saying, like, carnivore is this, carnivore is that, whatever. And I think of the people that are attending your book club who are just genuinely seeking answers. It's part of what I love about podcasting. I think you love it too. Like, you interview experts in carnivore like yourself. You also interview a lot of everyday people that we might not ever get to know if you didn't do those interviews. So
Mhm.
again, I want this episode to be for those people. But to start this off, like, how do you define and think about a carnivore diet to include, I guess, the most amount of people?
Well, I mean, I try to frame it in just in like what I think is optimal, what I think is the best thing for us to do, and then just say, look, you do whatever the hell you want. Like I don't care what people eat. I don't care what they do with their life. If they're, adults making their own decision in their own lives. I think it's very important that adults be allowed to make decisions in their own life. I'm very, I'm very strongly of that opinion that people be allowed to make decisions for themselves because anyone could be wrong. And so the only person that pays a price for people being wrong is you. And so you need to be able to make your own decisions for your own body and your own life. And so because if you're wrong, then yeah, you're paying the stakes. But if someone else is wrong and forces you to do something you don't want to do, they pay no price for being wrong. And so it's really important for people to be able to make their own decisions and what's right for them in their situation. Some people even say that, like, yeah, I've done a strict meat and water diet only, and it felt amazing and had all these great results. But it's just like it's just too restrictive for me. I have family issues. I get a lot of pressure from my family and all these other sorts of reasons where I just can't quite do it, even though I really enjoyed it. And it's like, okay, well, that's fine too. But at least you know now. At least you have that frame of reference that you feel really good on it. So to me, what I just frame it as what I think is the best thing to do. Someone say, "Oh, should you drink milk?" I'm like, you can, but I don't think it's optimal. It's going to have enough carbohydrates. It's going to raise your insulin. Insulin is a very busy hormone. It doesn't just put energy into cells like some people say. It does do that, but it also affects over 100 different processes in your body, and so we forget that. We're neglecting that part of it, that when you eat carbohydrates, the insulin goes up for everything else as well as the carbohydrates, and now things get out of balance. And so I don't want to do that. And so I don't partake in milk, maybe once a year, sometimes like that. I'll have some raw milk and, I'll have some or something like that. But it's very rare, very, very rare. And I always feel better for not doing it. I'll have some milk and it'll taste great and it'll taste amazing. I mean, it tastes like ice cream, It's like my sweet sense of taste is much more sensitive now. But then, that'll be great. And then I'll want more. And it'd be I sort of get into that sort of addictive craving sort of things. And I don't like that. I don't want something that I'm now going to be like a hungrily craving for, from an addiction side of things. But also it drops my energy. So, it gives you this insulin bump that drives your blood sugar down. And now you have reactive hypoglycemia and you're just like, ooh, now I'm sort of feeling a bit low, feeling tired. I want some more milk. You start chasing carbs again. It goes down that whole thing, which I'm so glad I'm out of. So I just mentioned that to people. I mentioned that, there can be some inflammatory properties to casein, the milk proteins. And so if you're sensitive to that and that's a problem, then, maybe avoid those sorts of things, avoid cheeses. Some people trying to lose weight, dairy can be a bit of a weight loss stall. Having spices and coffee and all these sorts of things, I just say, like, look, I don't think it's optimal. There are problems with it, but if you're just having just meat along with coffee and some seasonings or some asparagus, something that you like, you've cut out everything else, you're still doing a lot better, like far better than 99.999% of people out there, and including yourself. And so that's great. but I always encourage people just to try 30 days of just fatty meat and water, just so you can see the contrast, because a lot of people do that. I mean, that's why I run the 30-day challenges. Like, just try it for 30 days so you have a frame of reference and you see how you go. And I have a lot of people that do that, and they feel far better than they thought they would. And then when they go back and start adding in just those little bits of things, they end up seeing that contrast and how they felt, and they say, okay, actually, I don't want that in my body. I see what that's doing to me. And so that's the thing, this should be inclusive, but we shouldn't drive people out. Someone who's just understands that meat's not bad, understands that fat's not bad, understands that a processed food, sugar, seed oils, these things are very bad for you. But also that plants have toxins. This is just a reality of the world that we live in, and anybody can look that up in any botany textbook or horticulture textbook or anything like that. They want to study that, they can. This is a very, very straightforward thing. Any biologist or botanist who knows anything about the subject will know that. There's a lot of people that escape with a biology degree and don't know that, and I think that's a failing of their education. But certainly anybody who studied botany knows this, and and evolutionary biologists and things like that should know this. So there's a book called Most Delicious Poisons, which is probably something we should do for book
So
club.
good. So good.
Yeah, and as for an evolutionary biologist and professor at UC Berkeley, it just goes through it all. I mean, this is just very straightforward. I mean, it's just all these toxins in plants that we use. And he says from spices to vices, all the different toxins that in plants that we use as people for addictive purposes, or because we like the taste of them. And he talks about how these really strong flavors, those spices, that's actually the most toxic part of the plant. And so it's important to know that. This is just basic facts about the world you live in, and you ignore that at your own peril. So just educating people in that regard, letting them understand that meat is not bad for you. It's not going to cause disease. There is zero hard evidence that it ever has or ever will. And plants have objectively known toxins that have names and have been cataloged and categorized. And there's nearly 1 million of them in the plant kingdom. And so, this is not something to ignore. And so you just understand that and just say, okay, more fatty meat, less toxic other things, and then do what you want. Whatever you want to do in that spectrum is fine with me. I mean, I do think that people should. There are more strict Facebook groups like Zero Carb Health and Zero Gun Health, which I think are excellent, but they are more strict. They're like, look, we are just talking about zero carb, zero plants, just meat and water, and anyone's welcome in. But if you eat plants or anything outside of that, that's fine. That's your business. But please don't talk about the merits of doing that, because that's not what we're trying to do here. That confuses people. And so, like you said, there's always people saying, well, that's right and that's wrong and this, that, and the other. So that's their view on this is how to do it best. And so that's how we're going to frame it for new people to come in and say, okay, this is best. And if you want to deviate from that, you can, but it's just what people understand, or people, are trying to say is optimal. That's what I do. I believe that as well. I think that's optimal as well. And so, but anywhere someone wants to lay on that, that's totally fine. But, it's, that's what I think the best is to do. And if people want to follow that, that's fine. That's why I do it, because I feel the best on that. And objectively, I think that is the best. And so that's why I frame it that way.
Yeah, well, I love that. I love thinking about it in that way. I learned about that book from you, by the way, and it's not
Mm,
necessarily a book about nutrition, Most Delicious Poison, but it's fantastic. And how many times in the book does this guy say,
mm,
these plants are not here for humans?
yeah.
These plants don't care about humans. They're developing
Mhm.
things and have been developing things far longer than you will be around. They've done this for a very, very long time. They don't care about you. We have this
Yeah.
just such an entitled way of looking at plants. Like, all of these are here for us, so we can just take them and eat them however we want, whenever we want, as often as we want. And I had a
Mhm.
client ask me about this the other day, where it's like, so, like, do I have to be carnivore? Like, do you have to be? Like, no. But
Mhm.
like, when he starts asking about, like, if I have this plant, will this be okay? If I have an apple every now and again, will this be okay? It's like, I don't know. It's just raising questions. You're always going to have a question when you're introducing some of these plant foods. Are they going to be okay? Maybe, maybe not. It's hard to
Mhm.
say.
and it's relative too, right? Because someone with an autoimmune issue, if they have an apple, that could actually trigger that off. It has before. I know someone who is so sensitive to these things that even just using spices and seasonings gave them autoimmunity. And they ate nothing else except meat with seasonings for 40 years. And they still had autoimmunity. And then it wasn't until they dropped the spices and the seasonings and just went meat and water only that their autoimmunity went away. And so that's like how strong this stuff is to people that are sensitive to it. And but it's affecting all of us. It's going to negatively affect all of us. And so, we just need to understand that some people are going to be more sensitive than others, people from different ethnic backgrounds. So this lady in particular was Inuit descent in the First Nation, Canadian First Nation people. And so, I mean, her ethnic background, I mean, they didn't eat, they were eating just meat, seal, fish, polar bears, and whales up until a century ago. Right. So they really didn't have any time to adapt to this. And so 40 years ago, she's just 60 now. She had a baby, and as soon as that baby was weaned, it started getting very sensitive to anything besides meat, and would actually have seizures with anything except meat. And so they're like, all right, we're just eating meat, and that's totally culturally appropriate. And then that wasn't weird for them at all because of coming from their background. And so they did, but she had seasoning, she had spices, and she developed 4 autoimmune issues. And then she, sort of came across the idea that there are these plant toxins, and that, just getting rid of everything just down to meat and water, that can actually give a lot of benefit. And she's just like, well, there's no way that can be. Um, but she's like, okay, I'll try it for 30 days. You never know unless you try it. And she tried it 30 days. Her autoimmune issues started clearing up, and now they're gone, and they have not come back. And because she has not gone back, because this is a toxicity relationship. It's not you have a disease. No, it's just like there's this toxin that comes in your body and it makes you sick. That's what's happening. And so now she's removed that from her life, and then she doesn't have the toxicity anymore. So, it's very important for some people, but it is important for all of us. And just understanding that these toxins are not there for us. They did not, Foxglove did not make digitalis to, millions of years. I mean, they made this millions of years ago, right? They didn't make this so that one day this hairless ape would come down and go like, "Oh, you know what, I've just trashed myself with smoking and drinking my whole life, and my heart's going into failure. Like, I want to help that little shaved monkey, like that's important to me. So let's make this now." And so millions of years later, we can help that guy. Of course they didn't. This is completely coincidental. They made that poison to actually stop the heart of animals trying to eat that plant. They're like, you touch me, your heart stops, you're dead. And so, that's what it's there for. And that's why, anything outside of this dose is either ineffectual or fatal by a very small margin. I mean, we're talking micrograms here, so a millionth of a gram. We're talking you get this wrong by 50, 100 micrograms, you kill somebody, you know, or don't do anything, and so it's very, very, very sensitive. And and so it's just it's not there for us. Plants don't want us to eat them. They're becoming more and more aware of the level of consciousness that plants have. They can see us. They can see what color shirt we're wearing when we're standing next to them. They don't have eyes, but they have proteins and receptors all over their entire body that we have in the back of our retina that recognize visual light and things like that. So they don't have eyes; they are eyes, and they have what looks like neural networks and things like that. And they don't have a central nervous system, so they don't have a brain, but their whole body acts as a brain, you know. And so it's actually pretty remarkable. They scream, they can send off chemical signals of distress to their neighbors, send off waves like ultrasonic waves. They can speak to each other. They've figured out that like the different sort of frequencies and waves, and say it's like, hey, I'm thirsty, I'm dry. Like, hey, I need potassium or phosphorus. Hey, I need this over here. Well, like that they're actually talking to each other about that. And you can actually pick this up and go, oh shit, he needs water. So you can actually water them now because we're recognizing what those mean. They communicate through their root system. There's like a fungus system that is like two different kinds, and different plants that use a different fungus system. They can communicate to any other plant and tree that uses that same fungus system, even if it's not the same species. And there's generally like a sentinel tree in a forest that like runs the forest, is like the monarch of that forest, and actually directs traffic, and they actually can send water and nutrients through their root system, through this fungal root system, to different parts of the forest. So if it's like this part over here is going through a bit of a drought and this over here is flush, they can actually move water miles over and feed these trees over here through the root system. It's absolutely crazy. So they have an entire society and structure about how to survive as a colony. And we're just saying, just like, oh yeah, they just grow up and that's just all it is, it's nothing, there's nothing really to it. We just eat them and rip them apart, and it's just nothing. 100 years ago we thought that same thing about animals. We didn't think that they could feel pain, and it didn't matter if you tortured them, because it wasn't torture. They didn't feel pain like we did because they didn't have brains like we do. Well, that's obviously stupid, but we're doing the same thing now with plants, and we're just because we don't understand how they work, because they're different to us. We think that they have no consciousness whatsoever, and that they don't communicate, they can't feel pain. It's not the same thing. And then people say that they react and respond to damage like we would pain. They send the signal down, the signal comes back up, and there's a response, and they scream, and they send off signals of distress and all these sorts of things, right? So that's pain. But they don't recognize it like we do. It's not the same thing. How do you know? You don't know that. All you know is it's screaming, right? And that's what someone said. I can't remember who said the quote, but it was earlier last century, and he was a famous guy, and he was a vegetarian, and he said, vegetarians are people who have never heard a tomato scream, right? And that was what he's saying, is it's like, look, I've never heard, I hear animals scream, and that bothers me. I've never heard a tomato scream, so that's fine. Well, now we hear tomatoes scream. Tomatoes scream. All right. So now we know that. And so understanding that all life will scream and try to fight for its survival. What do you do then? Well, it's just not the same. Well, we said that about animals a century ago, and we were wrong then. I think we're wrong now. And so, we need to understand that. We need to be realistic about the world that we live in. Plants don't want you to eat them. They do feel pain. They do suffer. They do scream. They do cry out. They do try to defend themselves. When they start getting eaten by something, they actually produce more toxins, and they can produce toxins specific to the animal or insect eating them. And this is why, when you have like a bruised piece of fruit, or plant like celery, something like that, you have that bruise or damage, or insect starts eating it, you don't eat it because it's bad. Well, why is that? I mean, no one ever told me that as a kid. My mom would say, like, oh no, you don't do that, you don't want that part, because the plant's bad if an insect started eating into it, or if there's a sign of like a fungal infection, something like that, it's bad. And no one ever explained that to me. So I didn't know. I was like, well, is there like bacteria on the bug or something like that, or just something wrong with it? But what happens is that the plant mounts a defense and actually starts becoming more toxic and starts making more poison, which is why you see partial eating from a caterpillar or a something, and then it stops. It doesn't eat the whole leaf. It just eats some, and then it stops, because it starts going and mounting the attack and starts eating, but they start producing so much poison that it's just like, oh, can't eat this anymore, and they go somewhere else, right? And they scream and send off a signal to all the other plants around them, and all those plants start making more of those toxins to that caterpillar or aphid or whatever the hell is eating it. So, these are actually very sophisticated creatures, not necessarily creatures, but life forms. And they are the dominant life form on Earth. 97+% of life on Earth is plant life, of the biomass is plant life. And so, it's, you ignore that at your own peril. Like, these do have toxins. That's just a fact. And they don't want us to eat them. We are not biologically designed to eat these things. We've been millions of years out of the arms race between plants and animals. This is a well-known phenomenon, that plants become more and more toxic, so and less animals can eat them. And then animals having to adapt and evolve to be able to weather the storm on certain plant toxins. And but 10,000 years is not long enough, and 100 years is definitely not long enough. So while it hits them harder, and they may have seizures as babies, or they may get autoimmune diseases from spices, we all get sick, and we all get damaged, and it builds up eventually over years and decades, and causes serious disease. Just like smoking doesn't necessarily just kill you with one cigarette, right? But over the years, over the decades, this damages you. And so we recognize that as a poison. 50 years ago, 60 years ago, they were smoking cigarettes before they got out and raced the Tour de France on a single gear bike on dirt roads. I mean, it's just absolute, just animals, right? And they would smoke cigarettes because they thought it helped open up their lungs so they could perform better as athletes. They were smoking to make them more athletic because that's what they thought. Right now, we're like, oh, yeah, well, we know it's bad. Well, we didn't always know it's bad. Now we think salads aren't bad and in fact good for you. They thought smoking was good for you. We think salads are good for us. They're not. We were wrong both times. You don't want any of this garbage. And so it's just understanding that it's a really important thing to remember and to
Yeah.
understand.